Right now, most headlines are saying the Iranian regime is on the brink of collapse. But the reality on the ground looks very different. Despite sustained strikes, despite growing international pressure, and despite internal tensions, the Iranian system is still functioning, its security forces remain cohesive, and the leadership structure is adapting for a potentially long conflict. And perhaps most importantly, Tehran appears to believe it can outlast Washington. So in this video, we are going to break down what credible reports from inside Iran are actually showing, and why the next few weeks could be far more complicated than many analysts expect. First, let us address the biggest misconception. Yes, the Iranian regime is under significant pressure, but there is currently no evidence of a systemic collapse. Public services across major cities are still functioning. Government ministries are operating. And most importantly, the core security institutions of the regime remains intact. At the center of the current power structure is Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. While Iran technically has an interim leadership arrangement following the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, Larijani appears to be acting as the de facto central decision-maker during the conflict. Alongside him, a three-member interim council is managing the formal responsibilities of leadership. Importantly, this council can continue governing indefinitely until a new supreme leader is selected. In other words, Iran has built-in mechanisms to maintain continuity even during major crises. And the regime recently demonstrated its ability to mobilize domestic legitimacy. During the mourning ceremonies for Khamenei, authorities managed to bring 3 to 4 million people into the streets. Beyond the symbolism, this served two important strategic purposes. First, it reinforced the perception of regime stability inside Iran. Second, it bought time while Iranian officials explored potential diplomatic channels for a ceasefire. But so far, Tehran appears prepared for a conflict lasting weeks, not days. But one of the biggest unknowns right now is who will ultimately replace Khamenei. Iranian officials have quietly indicated that a new supreme leader will not be chosen while the war continues. Instead, the interim leadership structure will remain in place for as long as necessary. That leaves the succession process in a kind of strategic pause. But within the regime, several potential successors are already being discussed. Two names appear most frequently. The first is Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the former supreme leader. Mojtaba has spent years building relationships within Iran's security apparatus, particularly inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Those relationships matter enormously because no supreme leader can rule without the IRGC's support. Reports suggest Mojtaba may already have backing from several powerful figures, including newly appointed IRGC Commander Ahmad Vahidi, former IRGC Intelligence Chief Hossein Taib, and Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf. Together, these figures represent some of the most influential networks within the Iranian security state. The second possible successor is Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, a longtime regime insider with deep connections across the judiciary and intelligence services. Both candidates share one critical trait. They are deeply embedded within the system, meaning the transition could happen quickly if the leadership decides to move forward. For now, though, the regime appears content to delay the decision until the war environment stabilizes. Perhaps the most important development inside Iran right now involves the structure of its security forces. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the backbone of regime security, is adapting its operational model to survive sustained air campaigns. Rather than operating in large, centralized formations that are vulnerable to strikes, IRGC units have begun splitting into small 5-person cells. Each cell operates semi-independently. This dramatically reduces the damage that can be inflicted by air power alone. Even if one unit is destroyed, the rest of the network remains functional. At the same time, Iran's Basij militia, a nationwide paramilitary force with roughly 700,000 members, has adopted a similar structure. Instead of gathering at centralized bases, Basij members have dispersed throughout communities. Many have been armed and authorized to suppress unrest locally. This creates a distributed internal security network that can respond quickly to protests or instability anywhere in the country. From a military perspective, these decentralized structures make Iran far more resilient to external pressure. Airstrikes can damage infrastructure and leadership targets, but dismantling thousands of small autonomous units is significantly harder, which suggests the regime is preparing for a prolonged campaign rather than a short confrontation. This brings us to one of the most critical strategic calculations being made in Tehran. Iranian officials appear to believe they can tolerate pain longer than their adversaries. Some reports have claimed that Iran's Ministry of Intelligence attempted to contact the CIA shortly after the strikes. But those claims are widely discounted by analysts. In Iran's system, intelligence agencies do not conduct diplomatic outreach on behalf of the state. That responsibility belongs to the foreign ministry and senior political leadership. And while Larijani has reportedly sent messages to Washington through Ankara, the US administration has so far shown little interest in reopening negotiations. With diplomacy stalled, Iran's leadership seems to be pursuing a different strategy. Instead of seeking immediate de-escalation, they appear focused on raising the economic cost of the conflict. And the most powerful lever they possess is energy disruption. If Tehran can create instability in global energy flows, particularly in the Persian Gulf, it increases pressure not just on Washington, but also on Gulf states and global markets. In essence, Iran's leadership believes time and economic leverage may ultimately work in its favor. But there is another dimension to this conflict that receives far less attention. The possibility that Iran could fragment along ethnic or political lines. One of the most sensitive areas right now is Western Iran, where Kurdish groups operate along the Iran-Iraq border. Washington has signaled increasing support for Kurdish proxies in the region. Kurdish leaders have indicated they are not seeking to overthrow the Iranian regime directly, but even a limited offensive would force Tehran to divert security forces away from major cities. That redistribution could reduce pressure on protesters and opposition groups elsewhere in the country. Iranian officials are well aware of this possibility. In fact, the regime has reportedly spent years preparing for a worst-case scenario. That scenario involves an external coalition attempting to capture a major Iranian city and install an alternative political leadership. One figure frequently mentioned in that context is Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, the son of Iran's last monarch. According to regime sources, the city most often cited in this scenario is Shiraz. If such a foothold were established, it could theoretically become a rallying point for a broader uprising against the regime. Whether that scenario is realistic is highly debated. But the fact that Iranian leadership takes it seriously tells us a lot about how they view the strategic environment. So where does all of this leave us? Three major conclusions stand out. First, despite significant pressure, the Iranian regime remains structurally intact. Its leadership mechanisms are functioning, and its security forces are adapting. Second, the question of succession remains unresolved, and that uncertainty could shape Iran's political trajectory long after the current conflict ends. And third, Tehran appears committed to a strategy of strategic endurance, betting that it can impose enough economic and geopolitical costs to outlast its adversaries. The coming weeks will likely hinge on two key variables: whether energy disruptions begin to impact global markets, and whether internal pressures inside Iran begin to exceed what the regime's security apparatus can contain. Until then, the situation remains far more complex and far more stable than many early headlines suggested. And that is why understanding the internal dynamics of Iran right now is absolutely critical to understanding where this conflict goes next.